Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Peter. Always nice to hear you. Always nice. And I thought I'd start with this slide because I'm probably going to drift into kind of, a bit moaning and a bit ranty. So I thought I'd start with this because this is, I think, what we really need to understand is the potential of new landscapes for biodiversity. And I think we've sort of underplayed the new landscape thing. We've sort of thought that, oh, you've got to conserve things as they are, and new landscapes is just kind of cheap addition. But new landscapes can become incredibly important for wildlife incredibly quickly. We really need to understand that and make the most and get creative with new landscapes. So this image shows a landscape that we create. That's within 2 years of a direct sown brownfield landscape and bursting with wildlife. And I think it's just crucial that we don't lose sight of that. So that's my optimistic thing. I'm probably going to start ranting after that now, but anyway. So I think we need to think, I kind of beaver away in my own tiny way. But we really need to look at the bigger picture. And I know Peter's covered some of the policy, which is great. And we need to change. It really feels like we need to change some of the systems. So the systems that dictate what highways landscapes are like, the systems that dictate what landscape is like around developments and what the infrastructure in the development's like. And most importantly, which I'll touch on at the end, the system that maintains all these landscapes. Because unless we have a decent human maintenance system, then everything we're all talking about really kind of is pretty much worthless. Okay, so I've been looking at thinking about just what are the best landscapes, what makes places the best for wildlife. And it turns out that a lot of our SSSI sites, which in effect are supposedly our best landscapes, are on places that we have pretty much trashed, haven't we? So gravel pits, chalk pits, post-industrial areas, we've just sort of gone in, trashed them, smashed them to pieces, and then we've just left them alone. And if we do leave them alone, they weirdly, lo and behold, become one of our best places for wildlife, don't they? So you know where these places are. They're probably wildlife trust reserves. They're probably RSPB reserves, aren't they? These places. And we need to learn a lesson from these places. Why are these places so bloody good? And what they do is they have this amazing diversity, don't they, of substrate, of structure, of all those amazing things. And it's that diversity of landscape, topography, and structure that gives you the biodiversity in wildlife, isn't it? It feels like that's a fairly common sense thing. And so this is one example. This is a highways project. This is the A13 right near me. And now we in the South Essex we are packed with invertebrates in South Essex. And one of the best places for invertebrates in South Essex is the Thames Terraces. And what makes them good? Because they're basically just sand and gravel banks and fairly sparsely vegetated and rammed full of invertebrates. Okay, so they widened the A13. They scraped the embankment back. They exposed a most beautiful sand bank facing south. In other words, a new Thames Terrace, a huge new section of Thames Terrace. And what did they do? They covered it, as you can quite clearly see on the right-hand side, in topsoil. So they cover it in topsoil. So I think we feel like we can change the world by covering things in topsoil and planting trees, don't we? That seems to be oh yeah, we can trap a bit of carbon, and trees are great. So not only do they cover it in topsoil, which completely destroys the Thames Terrace habitat and all the invertebrates that are associated with that, they then decide to rake it completely smooth, don't they? Absolutely smooth, not a piece of topography, not a change in structure, not a change in substrate. So therefore, that habitat surely is getting, you know, what if you create a completely smooth habitat in the same soil, you're going to get pretty much the same vegetation and the same wildlife. This we need to avoid. And just as a case in point, this is Canvey Wick Nature Reserve of Bug Life. Well, they manage, very lightly manage, I think. It's a post-industrial site. It is the third most important invertebrate site in the UK. Okay, so this has just been left alone for 40 years. And it's now that. Okay, that includes all your ancient forests, woodlands, and all those other prestigious kind of habitats. You know, this is a massively important site. And it's our rubbish and our structure and our detritus, basically, that's created this amazing space. You know, and why is that? Why is that such an amazing place? Because it has structure and steelworks and rubble piles and different substrates, bits of topsoil, bits of old wool. It has that incredible diversity of topography and soils and structure. And that is what makes that so good. Now, don't you think we should learn from that when we're designing new landscapes? It feels to me like we really should. Now, there has been a lovely change. So highways finally in November have actually flipped, which is really rather amazing. After years of ranting, they have now said, you shouldn't use topsoil on embankments unless there's a good reason to. Okay, so they've wonderfully flipped, or October last year. So that's great. So we're now talking about landscape. We're now talking about the new landscape. And we're trying to understand what makes landscape good. And it's not just topsoil. So we really need to learn from these landscapes and what is it that makes them good. And this is where I am fortunate enough to live. And the sands that you can see in this image are the sands from the A13. So we've managed to get the sand from the A13, which I've now dumped in my garden. So this is the only exposed sand now from the whole of the 1.5 mile road widening is in my garden, not on the bloody A13. Yeah. And lo and behold, within 6 months, we had, I don't know, loads and loads of species that we would never have had in my garden if we hadn't brought the sand in and we hadn't had a bit of exposed sand. Amazing amount of invertebrates that pulled in. And we would have had 1.5 miles, huge expanse of that if we'd have left that highway alone. So, entomology. I don't know if you guys, I mean, some of you obviously are entomologists, I'm guessing. But if you're not an entomologist, you need to have an entomologist as a friend, because entomologists are the best ally for a landscape architect, for an ecologist, for a planner, for a structural engineer. The entomologists are the ones, because they can like this guy here, James, who's one of our closest friends, unbelievable guy, you know, just knows everything. So he tells me what the landscape is missing, what bugs it's missing, what those bugs like as a structural landscape. And then we design that landscape to suit those bugs. And if you get the bugs into your landscape, if the invertebrate levels are high in your landscape, then you get all the rest of the biodiversity pretty much for free, don't you? So if we focus our design work specifically on invertebrates, everything else comes off the back of that. And these are the guys you need to talk to. So if we're designing a landscape, these are the people that you need to talk to. Now, James he's no good at building a landscape, as he readily admits, and he definitely isn't. But he can tell me what these things need. And then it's our job as designers to be creative about designing these landscapes and designing that structure. Now, in South Essex, we are lucky enough to have had all your London rubbish over the last 40 years. How wonderful. Here it all is. It's filled in all these massive holes that we've made in South Essex. But the godsend of this is that they're all full up now and they're all being cut off. And what we've been left with is a completely blank canvas for new parks. Okay, so this means we haven't got a user group, we haven't got any archaeology, we haven't got any restrictions at all to design in this park, have we? Wonderful, right? So this is a park now near us, Little Bellas Park, on top of a landfill. This is a little project we did with a community arts group. And these are the materials these are all construction waste and mineral soils. And we've laid them out so that people can understand the potential of these substrates to create amazing landscapes. And then hopefully this is going to be rolled out into the park to make it, to have a big section of ecological landscape. Instead of just capping these landfills off with clay and then just leaving them in clay, and then you know the coarse grassland that develops from that. Fine, have some of that, but for God's sake, have some diversity of substrate on top of your landfill. That is the opportunity, for sure. And this is the joy of brownfield. So this is our place where we trial all the stuff. There's no topsoil, no organic material, virtually no organic material at all. This is all waste, construction waste, or mineral soils. And this is the amazing landscapes that you create. Fantastic for biodiversity. And when we have open days and when we have public land, people love this slightly sparse, open, wonderfully diverse landscape. People like this. Okay, they don't just want shrub beds and formal, lush, herbaceous borders. People like this stuff. So there's an aesthetic to it if you design it and get it right. So the other thing I think we need, and I'm going to have to move quickly on, is we need this structure. I think now everyone's planting plants for pollen and nectar. Great. Okay, everyone's doing that. The public's doing that, and we've got it in our heads, and there's all sorts of schemes going on. But what we miss a trick in is that we need the structural diversity for wildlife. We don't just need pollen and nectar. Okay, so shopping trolleys in ponds, you know, the most abhorrent thing that us conservationists, and you know, you could get 1,000 volunteers to come and pull that out of that pond, couldn't you? But that creates an amazing place for wildlife because it traps material. It creates niches. It's like a shipwreck, isn't it? It's like sinking a ship in the middle of an ocean. That's where all the wildlife is, okay? And there's been a study done, a PhD done by a student. I've given you the link there, Hazel, and she did a survey on riverbanks, and lo and behold, there was more biodiversity in the litter than there was in the general riverbank. So what's happening is our litter and detritus is filling in for the complete lack of natural structure that we've created now. Our landscapes are so bland that we've taken away that natural structure and we've tidied it away, or we've cleaned it up, I don't know. So litter has fallen into that. So there's more biodiversity in litter on a lot of the work that she showed than there is in the natural structure. Now, we don't want shopping trolleys in ponds. I understand that. We don't want crisp packs on the side of embankments. But shopping trolleys are brilliant for wildlife. We for God's sake, we use roofing felt to trap slow worms and newts and all sorts of other reptiles, don't we? We've done that for years in conservation, right? So we use man-made materials and we realize how good it is, and then we don't design it into landscapes. So we need to design this structure into the landscape in a creative way that looks cool and people are going to like, not just dump a trolley, obviously. And you can badly prune trees. I'll have to skip through some of this, but that's another nice idea. Okay, not in your fancy royal park, but there's opportunities there to create biodiversity. Look at where you can keep materials on site. So dead hedges, stacking waste from maintenance within the area that you actually work in. Incredibly important, creates an amazing place for wildlife and takes away all the carbon and all the energy use of taking this stuff away. Okay, we take it away and we take it to a green waste depot and we feel righteous about that. That's great. Okay, we've driven it all that way. We've put it in a green waste depot. It's all the machinery to chip it out. Then it goes to compost. Then it gets turned. Then it gets turned again. Then it gets put in a heap. Then we have to drive back to this place, pick up the green waste compost, then drive back to the landscape. Mad, really. If we can keep the waste on site, it makes perfect sense. And then we can start to look at places like car parks and paths and hard landscaping are becoming the only opportunities we've got to create biodiversity, aren't they? You don't get a Tesco store knocked down and a park put back, do you? You really don't. So we've got to make, any time we do any infrastructure, we must have a conversation and actually design in some habitat and some plants and make these places work for wildlife. And this is a car park that we're working on at the moment. This was, the planning on this place was passed in 2020, 150 car park, no planting, no habitat, nothing in 2020. How the hell is that allowed to happen? It's completely mad. So we've tried to be creative. So we've nicked some car park spaces. We've said 150 cars is way too many. Here's some car park bays that are going to become garden bays, right? So there's some wildlife going back. And we've used gabions, and we've used local sand. In fact, there's sand from the A13 all the way around this car park. Anyway, there's massive potential to create habitat within these kind of hard infrastructure work. And this is some of the A13 stuff. And then as soon as you start to look at the soils and the subsoils, you unlock the potential of invertebrate habitat. So these are ivy bees. We dumped sand on where we live here about 2 years ago. We're full of ivy bees there. Never had one because we're on clay, just a pile of sand, right? And the potential. And we're also working with UEL to look at waste material from industry. So this is calcium carbonate, comes from the sugar production industry. Waste, don't know what to do with it half the time. That is a potential substrate that I think is really going to work. So we've got that being trialed and we've got that being surveyed. Every structure, this is a cycle show, these are the things that we build. So every structure that you have, everything that goes in as a piece of hard landscape or hard infrastructure should have habitat in it somehow. Green roofs, great. Habitat on the side, great. You know what I mean? It's not difficult to change that from a bog standard bike shelter into something that actually works for wildlife. We've just installed this today. This is a bird hide down in Two Tree Island. Again, bird hides. How boring are bird hides? How intimidating are bird hides? My God, put habitat on them, put a green roof on them, make them places that family and kids want to go to. Surely, don't make them places for twitchers. Don't, because you're going to get them anyway. You want new people, families, kids. You want all those interested in wildlife. The bird watchers are going to be there anyway, and they don't spend much money in visitor centres generally. So lastly, and I was talking about the maintenance early on. So all this stuff I've been talking about, bit pointless unless we have a decent caring maintenance set up in place. So this is the classic thing, isn't it? The stainless steel spade, we've built some infrastructure, we get the mayor out, we take the picture, and then we walk away, and a bloke on £10 an hour with a strimmer comes to look after it in a couple of years' time. Pointless landscapes unless the maintenance is invested in. So if we get funding for infrastructure, we should give at least, if you ask me, 40% of that money, 60% of it to build the stuff, and 40% of it for someone to care for it and look after it. And we looked after a housing estate in Hackney in East London for 18 years. And we changed the maintenance contract. We tweaked the maintenance contract. That's all we did, right? Because it was the dumbest thing. In fact, the maintenance contract that we signed up to never really allowed us to take ear protection off. That was the maintenance contract. We either cut hedges, we cut grass, or we spray chemicals. That was the maintenance contract. We need to get away from that, and we need to garden, and we need to make maintenance guys the guys that can talk to the people that live there and change the place to suit the people that are living there, not just measure the bloody grass. Anyway, that's it. I'm gone over time, I know, but that's me pretty much done, I think. You've probably had enough.